Hello everyone, and welcome back to another GIS lecture video. And in this lecture video, I want to continue where we left off talking about this idea of GPS, or the Global Positioning System. And I want to start off by sort of reiterating where we have been so far. So in the previous video, we sort of outlined what we're going to talk about in the series, but we also laid down the foundation that this idea of GPS, at least in the United States, and then GNSS, or Global Navigation Satellite System for the world more broadly, was that the whole point of it was to get the location on Earth, right? That we're using this GPS technology and the different components that we're going to talk about in this video to somehow be able to get the location of a receiver, right? Because that's what we are, whether it's your smartphone or an integrated chip in your car, right, to get the location of that receiver on Earth. So let's go ahead and talk at a very high level about what kinds of components are involved, or what the pieces of the system are. And again, we're not going to be going into the mechanical engineering aspects of it. Rather, we're just going to be talking at a very high level about sort of the broad pieces. So when we talk about GPS, the thing that most people think about is this idea of a satellite. And so GPS would not be possible without the satellite. Right. And then this is the part that I think we sort of take for granted a lot of times, because again, it's just so integrated into everything in our society, is that there's you, right? There's you, and you are just kind of chilling out, and we'll go ahead and put you on the Earth. That way it's a little less, let's actually move the Earth up a little bit so you're actually standing on it here. Right, this is you on the Earth. Now, we don't call you you. In the context of GPS, right, you actually have in your hand, or maybe it's in your car, right, you have a little device that's capable of talking to and communicating with the satellite. We call this little piece here, right, this thing here is called the receiver. Right, this is the receiver. This is the thing that's communicating with the satellite. And these are the two pieces that we typically think of when we think about GPS, right? First we think about the satellite, and then we think, okay, well, we have something in our smartphone that's allowing us to communicate back and forth. And so the idea with GPS, as we've kind of alluded to before, is that there is a message, right? Some information that's being passed, right? Data or information, right? Data or information is being passed from the satellite to the receiver so that the receiver can then figure out where it is on Earth. And so if we want to put slightly more formal terms to this, we can put more formal terms when we say the satellite, or satellites, right? Because there's more than one. We'll talk about that in the next video here. But satellites, we more broadly refer to this as the space segment. Right? The satellites, right, the stuff that's orbiting the Earth, these are called the space segment. The receiver, right, you holding the receiver, right, we typically call this the user segment. And that's the part we typically think of. But there's actually a third part that you might not necessarily think of, especially if you're not intimately familiar with how GPS works. And that's there are these buildings, right, that also have receivers. Right, that are getting the exact same messages from the satellites. Right, so the satellite is sending out its information. It's being detected not only by the receiver in your hand or your car, but it's being detected as well by receivers in these special buildings that we call base stations. Right, we call these receivers base stations. Now, just like satellites had the space segment, right? Us with our receivers were the user segment, right? These base stations we call the control segment. Or control component, right? I'm using segment rather than component, but I'm using those terms interchangeably, right? So the control segment is going to be involved with the sort of error handling, right? And we'll talk a lot more about that in a future video. But we can kind of see here that the role of the space segment, right, this produces, actually let's make this a different color here, right? We can talk a little bit about the role here, the role of what each one of these is doing. Right? The space segment, right, it produces information. Right, this is sending out this signal. The user segment, right, this receives information. And calculates location. Right, calcs location. Right, this control segment, as the name control might imply here, right, this control segment is all about error processing. So when we talk about how we can reduce errors, right, a lot of that is going to be coming from this control segment. And there's going to be similarities between the control segment and the user segment that we'll talk about in a later video. But basically, again, satellite is producing the information that's being received by the user and the control segment. The user segment takes that information and calculates your location, updates your location so that you can have things like Google Maps give you real-time routes. The control segment, right, it also receives that information and processes it, but it's going to do something that'll help the receiver on the user side end up with a more accurate location. Okay, so let's just sort of recap what we've done here, and let's put these maybe in some more a little bit more of a defined list here. So what we've done here is we've managed to sort of outline and describe the three components of GPS, right? And again, we're using GPS because we're teaching this class assuming you're familiar with the American system, but these same concepts apply more broadly. And so the three components, again, just to recap, were the satellite, the user, and the control. Satellite produces a signal, user receives the signal and processes the location, and the control helps with handling errors. So hopefully this all made sense, and if you have any questions, as always, please reach out. Thank you.